Someone in the chat just said Putin poisons his political opponents. And it's like, yes, he does. So does everyone else.
You know the joke about
anyone here follow Pomidor?
Sorry again.
Oh, no, that's all right.
I think the question about Putin, by the way, don't get me wrong. I'm a great follower of Putin, mainly because the alternatives were far worse. Right? And that goes for a lot of politicians, right? Yeltsin was a complete waste of time. He destroyed Russia, as far as I'm concerned.
He sold its guts out.
Yeah. He sold the whole thing out. So Putin came in, and we've had a degree of stability. The only thing that has destabilized Russia has been NATO and all this screwing around. And otherwise, Russia could well have been allied with the European Union, for example.
Well, imagine if Kadyrov was the one who instead of Putin, right? Like people say, oh, Putin should go down to power. Oh, Zelensky is such a hero for refusing to negotiate with Putin until Putin steps down. It's like, look at what kind of people are around Putin. Many of them are way more harsher than this guy.
That's something no one talks about. Putin is absolutely holding the reins on some of the most extreme politicians who could take power.
Absolutely.
If you give,
be careful what you wish for, is what I keep saying to people. You want Putin gone? What are you going to replace him with?
Yeah.
I mean, look, going to be
guys, no, you don't understand. We're going to replace him with Navalny, obviously, and then we're going to turn Russia into a puppet state.
And or it will be Kadyrov taking over because he's gaining so much influence over the war, and then he will be bullish. He'll be like the Churchill of Russia now. Then he will take over, and then he's like, okay, we're going to rush, and then half of Ukraine will be gone easily at any time. And he made it very clear that he wants to go back to Kiev.
Look at Medvedev. I mean, I used to think that guy was kind of a goofy nobody, and then now he's he's more militant than Putin. He's always running his mouth like he kind of comes off like he doesn't give a fuck. Like if you want to talk about nukes, fine. Fuck you. I'll shoot some nukes at you.
No, he said, "Oh, you guys want to talk about nukes? Get back to me when Kiev is a smoldering ash heap."
Yeah, I mean he's like way more militant as far as what he's saying publicly than Putin, and it might be a good cop, bad cop kind of thing because they've been partners for a long time. But still, it's like everybody's saying, there's way nastier dudes. What was that one guy? I can't think of his name. It was like back in the 90s. He used to always run his mouth about how he was going to take Alaska back.
Right, he never really meant it. It was all conjecture.
Oh, I know, but I mean, just the voice, the bluster, and the aggression and stuff. It's like there's a lot worse guys out there that are way more aggressive. They might actually say, "Hey, you know what? Let's take the Balkans back."
I think you got to look at competence as well. I mean, Putin he's been around for a long time, and that does prove something. It's like Erdogan. People in Turkey, people criticize Erdogan because he's authoritarian, but he has kept the country stable and he's grown the economy. And at the end of the day, as Xi Jinping would say, we have taken 750 million people out of poverty. Now, talk to me about human rights when you've taken that many people out of poverty. And you just can't beat the argument. It's ridiculous. If you speak to a mother in Afghanistan and you say to her, what would you prefer? To be able to take off your veil or feed your children? What would you prefer? She's always going to say, I'm going to feed my children first, and then I'm going to worry about the rest. And so Xi Jinping says, fundamental human right is, can you clothe your children? Can you feed your children? Can you house your children? Are you safe? Safety being the primary role of the state.
Coming from Xi Jinping, that's kind of funny because he's got that own problem in China. He can't feed his people.
But he can't feed his people? Are you sure?
He can't feed most of his people. They had to redefine what poverty was 3 years ago because they couldn't decrease that.
You can't really trust.
Very careful, Alan. I'd look at the facts before that. I really would. I could send you something, Alan. I could send you lots of things about China. I mean, most people, China has got more high-speed rail lines than the whole of Europe. They built in 1 year more high-speed rail lines than the whole of Europe. So their authoritarianism allows them to take decisions which we can only dream about, right?
Yeah, but also some of that stuff too. I mean, you can remember the earthquakes in the substandard construction that they said, per Chinese media, wiped out an entire generation of Chinese children that were in schools when those schools collapsed. So, I mean, they get a lot of stuff done, but it doesn't mean it's good. It doesn't mean it's quality, and it doesn't mean it's lasting.
A huge.
I think you're both pointing out
cities over there that are completely empty.
I think you're both pointing out the correct thing here, because what Danny is referring here to is that they are very effective in the sense that they get things.
I'll say that. I'm just saying. I mean,
they're not necessarily efficient. There can be a lot of flaws in that, and this is tend to be an inherent thing you tend to see with centralized planning on a large scale. That it tends to be like that when you kind of have like almost like snap decisions going on, and you have a system that can kind of move along with it. But of course, then you're going to have all these things popping up, like you mentioned with the earthquake, for example. And yes, that's
and I guess that's not really fair of me to say, oh, you know, that happened to China, because I mean, like you said, a huge projects like that, there's going to be rife with corruption. I mean, you can look at our own military-industrial complex and the amount of corruption.
I just look at your roads falling apart.
Exactly. I mean, how much money do they collect in taxes every day? But I still have to drive through potholes and shit.
Yeah.
Well, that's
you've still got no railways.
So it's not, I guess that's not really fair for me to say that about China.
Seth is going to speak.
All I was saying was that was really the trade-off between democracies and authoritarian governments. Authoritarian governments, fast-acting, can handle problems, can get things done really quickly. Democracies take forever, but democracy allegedly guarantees freedom. So that's really the trade-off between the two governing types. So China's going to be able to build up really quickly, just like Imperial Japan was able to come from a feudalism to a modern nation overnight. It's the same deal.
I don't really see that. I think there's a false equivalency of U.S. democracy and China being necessarily different when it comes to ability to just simply go through with political will. How did Ukraine suddenly get well over $100 billion while there's a lot of internal problems going on in the U.S.? There's no votes on this among the people. All the so-called squad and progressives are supposed to be anti-war. They tend to be voting in all the directions of war every single time, just like Bernie Sanders. Like, he doesn't even talk about Medicare almost anymore, right? Like, so it's we say democracy and authoritarianism, like China and the U.S. are like. They're not like, I don't think it's kind of makes much sense really to compare them as a democracy versus authoritarianism, because they're both operating with much of a command economy. The biggest socialist institution in the world is the U.S. military. They have they're quite detached from the population.
That's just such a funny way of putting it. That's a funny way to put that. But you're right.
I want to correct Alan just now, is that China don't really have a food problem now. Per se, because ever since the Great Starvation, during the Cultural Revolution, they have put everything into food. So so they actually make enough food for themselves. What they don't have enough is grains for the pigs. So what they do is that they have rice and everything, and soy for consumption. Then they do not have enough grain or soy for the pigs, so they import the soy from USA. Now they are moving all this import to South America. Like they actually encourage Argentina and I think I'm not sure Chile, Brazil to make all this soy. So because they want to diversify away from United States. So all these grains that they import, the food import is actually for the pigs. Yeah. So because Chinese love to eat pork, so they just import the soy. So in terms of food, they don't really have an issue per se. So the problem they have is actually energy. So energy is one of the big imports that they need, and then a lot of high tech stuff they do not have. Like for example, we have a lot of we say that they are the factory of the world. They build all the TV, they make all the TVs and everything. Like all the LED TVs, all the flat TVs is all made in China. But the thing is that the core technology that projects the LED is all from South Korea, from LG and Samsung. And all these parts is imported OEM. So all the different brands you can see, regardless. Like for example, I'm using Prism Plus. I'm not sure you guys have it or not. All these brands, all the inside, the hardware is actually all South Korean. The Chinese are only doing the putting together of the
assembly.
the assembly, the most high tech parts, they don't really have it. So
what about the aircraft industry, Wyatt? I mean, they've just brought into or bringing into service that new plane which competes with the Airbus A320 and with the Boeing 737, and so they've managed to make an aircraft now and an airliner, and the first orders have been placed. They're going to be flying. I mean, they're certainly going to be flying into Singapore.
Yeah.
So when we
and you can see this here, like I learned something. I didn't know that information, Wyatt, and I appreciate that you told me. It's just, I guess there's so much. I mean, I'll call it propaganda. I probably fell for some heavy propaganda. It's
the anti-Chinese propaganda in the States is terrible.
No, it's
terrible.
I can acknowledge that it's very intense. Yeah, Vaughn, go ahead.
Does China have any nuclear plants, or is there a reason why China wouldn't go nuclear to meet that need? Just because
it's building nuclear plants in the UK.
They have China, like he says, Wyatt's saying China's got an energy problem. It seems like a nuclear plant would be a quick fix.
They have nuclear energy, but I don't think they have the uranium. I don't think they mine enough uraniums. This is my
Russia that's got
from memory.
I thought China has the largest.
Because I mean, I know they've got nuclear submarines and stuff, so I would assume they could do a reactor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
they've got nuclear power. They've got nuclear power. It's no problem. They just haven't got enough. I mean, they need energy in order to manufacture.
It just seems to me like that would be the quickest fix for them, because I know they do a lot of coal and everything, but it seems like since they already have nuclear reactors on some of their ships and stuff, that they could easily just start building some reactors in the civilian side and put those into wherever. I guess unless they're worried about earthquakes or something. But
they're currently building a nuclear reactor in the UK. So there's a plant called Sizewell C, I think it's not only funded by China, but it's actually the technology it's Franco-Chinese. So it's French type technology built by the Chinese and financed by the Chinese. And that's the UK.
I think
so the UK is incapable of building on its own a nuclear power plant.
Okay. Well,
that's the same thing with the United States. I don't know why
the technology is.
Well,
the technology is easier. Coal is easier, which is why they put a lot more into coal, because they themselves produce coal. They have more than enough. They can do export of coal. The problem is that quality of coal is not as good. And then they did something weird. They start to change a lot of their coal plants into a different type of coal plant that actually uses Australian coal, a higher quality coal. Yeah. And then, so what happens during the sanction? They sanction Australia. They essentially sanction themselves. So then their power plants cannot use the Chinese coal because the quality of the coal is different. So so I believe the reason not going full nuclear was probably because of self-sufficient problem. I think coal is easier, is cheaper, and they have a lot of it. I'm not sure they have enough uranium.
Well, energy is one thing, but what about population stability? Because I know that's actually something Russia and China both might be facing.
China's population is aging and dropping. Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm getting at.
You have to thank Singapore for it,
I used to always hear, like in the 80s and 90s, I used to always hear like China's got an overpopulation of men and those men can't find mates.
Yes.
And that's going to lead to China having a war because just all that testosterone is going to go somewhere. And,
I mean, because
I don't know if that's true or not. I guess I could see them, they have a lot of guys and they're going to fight. But
yes,
I think China would rather get everything as cheap as they could as far as not having a war. If they can get Taiwan without shooting or have more influence in the Pacific, I don't think, and they don't have to fire anything off, I'm sure they'd like to do that. But at the same time,
simply because they have an aging population that economically, simply because they have an aging population and economically, they really can't afford wars so much.